Welcome today, historic, and we will be talking about Christopher Columbus. Christopher Columbus was an Italian explorer and navigator. He made 4 voyages across the Atlantic Ocean, sponsored by the Catholic monarchs. These expeditions were the first known European contact with the Caribbean and Central and South America. Columbus's early life is obscure, but scholars believe he was born in the Republic of Genoa between 25 August and 31 October 1451. Many places in the Western Hemisphere bear his name, including the South American country of Colombia, the Canadian province of British Columbia, the American city Columbus, Ohio, and the District of Columbia. Columbus was widely celebrated in the centuries after his death, but public perception fractured in the 21st century. Before 1484, Columbus returned to Porto Santo to find that his wife had died. He returned to Portugal to settle her estate and take Diego with him. He left Portugal for Castile in 1485, where he took a mistress in 1487. A 20-year-old orphan, Beatrice, unmarried at the time, gave birth to Columbus's second son, Fernando Columbus. In July 1488, Columbus recognized the boy as his offspring. Columbus made several errors in calculating the size of the Earth, the distance the continent extended to the east, and therefore the distance to the west to reach his goal, despite a popular misconception to the contrary. Nearly all educated Westerners of Columbus's time knew that the Earth is spherical. Most European navigators reasonably concluded that a westward voyage from Europe to Asia was unfeasible. The Catholic monarchs, however, were eager to obtain a competitive edge over other European countries in the quest for trade with the Indies. By about 1484, Columbus proposed his planned voyage to King John II of Portugal. The king submitted Columbus's proposal to his advisors, who rejected it in 1488. Columbus again appealed to the court of Portugal, and John II again granted him an audience. That meeting also proved unsuccessful, in part because not long afterwards, Bartolomeu Dias returned to Portugal with news of his successful rounding of the southern tip of Africa. Columbus sought an audience with the monarchs Ferdinand II. On his first voyage he reached the Americas, initiating the European exploration and colonization of the continent. Columbus refused to acknowledge that the lands he visited and claimed for Spain were not part of Asia. In the face of mounting evidence to the contrary, his role in history is important to the age of discovery and Western history. Columbus called the inhabitants of the lands that he visited Los Indios Spanish. For Indians he initially encountered the Lucayan, Taino, and Arawak peoples. Columbus left 39 men, including the interpreter Luis de Torres, and founded the settlement of La Navidad in present-day Haiti. Columbus set sail from Cadiz on 24 September 1493 with 17 ships and supplies to establish permanent colonies in the Americas. He sailed with nearly 1,500 men, including sailors, soldiers, priests, carpenters, stonemasons, metalworkers, and farmers. Among the expedition members were Alvarez Chanca, a physician who wrote a detailed account of the second voyage on 17 November. Columbus first sighted the eastern coast of the island of Puerto Rico, known to its native Taino people as Borican. His fleet sailed along the island's southern coast for a whole day, before making landfall on its northwestern coast at the Bay of Añasco early on 19 November. Upon landing, Columbus christened the island San Juan Bautista after John the Baptist, and remained anchored there for 2 days, from 20 to 21 November. In June 1495, the Spanish crown sent ships and supplies to Hispaniola. In October, Florentine merchant Gianotto Berardi, who had won the contract to provision the fleet of Columbus's second voyage and to supply the colony on Hispaniola, received almost 40,000 maravedis worth of enslaved Indians. He renewed his effort to get supplies to Columbus, and was working to organize a fleet when he suddenly died in December. Columbus and his brothers were seized by Francisco de Bobadilla at Santo Domingo in October 1500. They were returned to Spain and languished in jail for 6 weeks before King Ferdinand ordered their release. New light was shed on the seizure of Columbus and his brother Bartholomew, the Adelantado, with the discovery by archivist Isabel Aguirre of an incomplete copy of the testimonies. Christopher Columbus left for Hispaniola on 16 April 1503. His ship sustained damage in a storm off the coast of Cuba. Unable to travel farther, on 25 June 1503, they were beached in St. Anne Parish, Jamaica. For 6 months, Columbus and 230 of his men remained stranded on Jamaica. The governor, Nicolas de Ovando y Cáceres, detested Columbus and obstructed all efforts to rescue him and his men. During a violent storm on his first return voyage, Columbus, then 41, had suffered an attack of what was believed at the time to be gout in subsequent years. He was plagued with what was thought to be influenza and other fevers. The attacks increased in duration and severity, sometimes leaving Columbus bedridden for months at a time, and culminated in his death 14 years later in 1877. A priest discovered a lead box at Santo Domingo inscribed, "Discoverer of America, First Admiral." Inscriptions found the next year read, "Last of the remains of the First Admiral, sire." Christopher Columbus. Discovered the box contained bones of an arm and a leg, as well as a bullet. These remains were considered legitimate by physician and also Assistant Secretary of State John Eugene Osborne, who suggested in 1913 in many countries of the Americas, as well as Spain and Italy. Columbus Day celebrates the anniversary of Columbus's arrival in the Americas on 12 October 1492. The voyages of Columbus are considered a turning point in human history, marking the beginning of globalization. In the first century after his endeavors, Columbus's figure largely languished in the backwaters of history, and his reputation was beset by his failures as a colonial administrator. The discovery of America's sculpture, depicting Columbus and a cowering native maiden, was commissioned on 3 April 1837, when U.S. President Martin Van Buren sanctioned the engineering of Luigi Persico's design. This representation of Columbus's triumph and the natives' recoil is a demonstration of supposed white superiority over savage, naive natives. The American Columbus myth was reconfigured later in the century when he was enlisted as an ethnic hero. Norsemen are believed to have set sail from Greenland and Iceland to become the first known Europeans to reach the North American mainland. The 1960s discovery of a Norse settlement dating to c. 1000 AD at Lancewood Meadows, Newfoundland, partially corroborates accounts within the Icelandic sagas. Some historians have criticized Columbus for initiating the widespread colonization of the Americas and for abusing its native population. Other scholars defend Columbus's actions or allege that the worst accusations against him are not based in fact. As a result of protests and riots that followed the murder of George Floyd in 2020, many public monuments of Christopher Columbus have been removed, according to some historians. The punishment for an indigenous person aged 14 and older failing to pay a hawk's bell or cascabella worth of gold dust every 6 months was cutting off the hands of those without tokens. Stated that Columbus's government was characterized by a form of tyranny. The indigenous population of the Americas is thought to have been reduced by boom, about 90% in the century after Columbus's arrival. Other historians dispute such accounts. Consuelo Varela, a Spanish historian, a third of the natives forced to work in gold and silver mines died every 6 months within 3 to 6 decades. The surviving Arawak population numbered only in the hundreds. Columbus was taller than average, with light skin often sunburnt, blue or hazel eyes, high cheekbones and freckled face, an aquiline nose, and blonde to reddish hair and beard until about the age of 30. When it began to whiten, one Spanish commentator described his eyes using the word garzos, now usually translated as light blue. Thanks for watching the video. See you next time.